I am Princess Jar bint Ursal al-Rashid, and I never plan to become a witness for something Saudi Arabia tries to erase. I grew up in the Saudi royal household where every decision about my life was already made. I had wealth, privilege, and position, but I did not have freedom or answers. Then when I turned 24, my father gave me an assignment: oversee a royal women's outreach program for mosque education in Riyadh and Jeddah. It seemed like just another duty in a life full of obligations. But during my first 3 months, over 200 Saudi women told me something that shook me to my core. They were encountering a man during ASR prayer, the afternoon prayer, who appeared in light, spoke their names, and invited them to follow him. They described his words: "I am closer than your breath. Your prayers are searching, but your heart is hungry. I carried your shame." None of them had read the Bible. None knew these were the words of Jesus Christ from Scripture, yet they were meeting him supernaturally in the middle of Islamic worship. I tried to find rational explanations. There were none. So I began secretly documenting testimonies. Within a year, the reports exploded from hundreds to thousands, and then to millions across Saudi Arabia. And then during ASR in the Palace Mosque, Jesus appeared to me. He called me by my name. He said, "I did not come to take your kingdom. I came to give you one." In that moment, everything changed. Following him in Saudi Arabia means risking execution. But encountering his presence means finding life. This is my testimony. This is how God is moving in the most closed kingdom on earth, not through churches or missionaries, but through prayer itself. But let me start from the beginning. I am 28 years old, and I was born in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, in the spring of 1998. I am a member of the Saudi royal household, a distant but recognized branch of the Al-Rashid line. Not immediate family to the king, but close enough that my name carries weight in certain circles. Close enough that I grew up behind palace walls. Close enough that I have never known what ordinary freedom feels like. My father, Prince Ibn bin Mansur al-Rashid, serves as a senior advisor in the Ministry of Religious Affairs and has deep connections to the clerical establishment. My mother, Amina, comes from a respected family with ties to the Najdi aristocracy. I have one older brother, Khalid, who is 31 and works in diplomatic relations with other Gulf states. I have one younger sister, Rayla, who is 23 and was recently married to a cousin from another royal branch in a wedding that felt more like a business merger than a celebration. We are not the ruling family, but we are close enough to power that our lives are defined by privilege, expectation, and surveillance. Every movement watched. Every choice scrutinized. Every word measured. I grew up in a sprawling palace compound in the Al-Malaz district of Riyadh, one of the older, more traditional royal neighborhoods. Our estate sits on 6 acres of land, surrounded by high walls topped with security cameras and motion sensors. Armed guards stand at every entrance. Inside the compound, there are several buildings: the main residence where my parents live, a guest wing for dignitaries and extended family, and private quarters for each of us children once we reached adolescence. The gardens are immaculate. Imported roses, date palms, marble fountains that run day and night, reflecting pools that mirror the sky. Everything is designed to project power and purity. But despite all the beauty, it has always felt like a museum to me. Or a mausoleum. A place where you are preserved but not alive. Where everything is controlled but nothing is real. I could not leave without permission. I could not go anywhere without a driver, a chaperone, and security trailing behind. I could not choose my own clothes, my own friends, my own schedule. Every detail of my life was decided by someone else: my father, my brother, tradition, religion, reputation. That is what it means to be a woman in the Saudi royal family. You have everything except yourself. My childhood was nothing like the childhood of ordinary Saudi girls. And it was certainly nothing like the lives of girls in the West whom I would later read about in smuggled magazines and censored internet searches. I did not attend public school or even private academy. I was educated at home by private tutors who came to the palace under strict supervision. I learned Arabic literature, mathematics, science, English, and later French. I had a Quranic instructor, a severe woman named Usta Maram, who taught me memorization, Islamic jurisprudence, and the rigid principles of Wahhabi interpretation that dominate Saudi religious life. From the time I was 6 years old, I wore the abaya, the long black cloak, whenever I left the palace grounds, even to go to another family compound. By the time I was 12, I had memorized over half the Quran and could recite the rules of modesty, obedience, and silence without hesitation. By 16, I understood that my life would follow a predictable path: more religious training, a degree from a women's university, an arranged marriage to strengthen family alliances, children, charity work through royal women's committees, and a carefully controlled public image that reflected well on the family name. Everything in my life revolved around obedience, reputation, and prayer. 5 times a day, like clockwork, we stopped whatever we were doing and turned toward Mecca. Fajr before dawn, Duhar at midday, ASR in the afternoon, Maghrib at sunset, Isha after dark. These prayers were not optional. They were the rhythm of Saudi life, the heartbeat of our faith, the structure that held everything together. For most of my life, prayer felt mechanical, ritualistic. Words I had memorized, movements I had perfected, obligations I fulfilled without thinking. But the prayer that would change everything for me, and for millions of Saudis, was ASR, the afternoon prayer. At first, it meant nothing special. It was just the third prayer of the day, falling in that quiet space between lunch and evening, when the sun begins its slow descent and shadows grow long. A routine checkpoint in an already routined life. But years later, ASR would become the moment when Saudi Arabia's greatest secret began unfolding right in front of my eyes. The moment when heaven invaded the most controlled, most closed, most carefully guarded nation in the Islamic world. And it began so quietly that at first, no one, not even I, understood what was happening. When I turned 24, my father summoned me to his private study. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had just returned from a women's charity luncheon at the Four Seasons, one of those carefully orchestrated events where royal women smiled politely, ate delicately, and said nothing of substance. My father's assistant met me at the palace entrance with a message: His Excellency requests your presence immediately. I found him seated behind his massive desk, surrounded by leather-bound books on Islamic jurisprudence and framed photographs with religious officials and government ministers. He did not look up when I entered. "Jahra," he said finally, motioning to the chair across from him. "You have completed your studies. It is time you contributed meaningfully to the family's responsibilities." I sat, hands folded, waiting. "I am assigning you to oversee a royal women's outreach program," he continued. "It will be connected to mosque education initiatives in Riyadh and Jeddah. You will coordinate with female religious instructors, attend weekly prayer sessions, and report on the spiritual development of young Saudi women." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Officially, this is about improving spiritual discipline and religious commitment among our young women. The kingdom needs strong, faithful daughters who understand their role." Then he paused, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. "Unofficially, Jahra, this is about control. We live in a time when dangerous ideas spread through social media, when Western influences corrupt young minds, when loyalty can no longer be assumed. Your role is to keep these women's devotion strong, their curiosity weak, and their influence manageable. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. This was not ministry. It was surveillance. "Yes, Father," I said quietly. Within 2 weeks, I began my new routine. Every Monday and Thursday, I traveled to different mosques across Riyadh and Jeddah, sitting in prayer halls with hundreds of women. During ASR, the afternoon prayer, we stood shoulder to shoulder in long rows, our black abayas creating waves of uniformity, our voices whispering verses we had memorized since childhood. The atmosphere in these sessions was always the same, stiff, controlled, mechanical. Women arrived quietly, prayed dutifully, and left without lingering. There was no warmth, no connection, no life. Just ritual. Just obligation. Just the empty repetition of words we had spoken 10,000 times before. For the first month, nothing unusual happened. And then, on a warm afternoon in late spring, during ASR prayer at a mosque in the Al-Nasim district, something changed. A woman beside me froze. At first, I thought she had simply lost her place in the recitation. But then I noticed her hands, they were trembling violently. Her lips had stopped moving. Tears began rolling down her face beneath her veil, silent and uncontrollable. I glanced at her, concerned, but continued praying. When ASR ended and the other women began to rise, she did not stand. She stayed on the floor, her forehead pressed against the carpet, breathing as if she had just run for her life. Her whole body shook. After most of the women had left, I knelt beside her. "Sister, are you unwell?" I asked quietly. "Do you need water? Should I call someone?" She lifted her head slowly, her eyes wide and unfocused, her face streaked with tears. I am fine," she whispered, though clearly she was not. "What happened?" I pressed gently. She looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was listening. Then she leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "Princess, during prayer, I saw a man standing in front of me." I almost laughed. A man? In a woman's prayer hall? Impossible. But something in her expression stopped me. "He was not part of the mosque," she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He was not physical. He was bright, alive, like light but shaped like a person. And he spoke to me in Arabic." My heart skipped. "What did he say?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She hesitated, then whispered the words as if they were dangerous. "He said, 'I am closer than your breath.'" Then, without waiting for my response, she gathered her things and hurried out of the mosque, leaving me kneeling alone on the carpet. I sat there for several minutes, trying to process what I had just heard. Imagination, I told myself. Stress. Emotion. Maybe the heat. Religious fervor sometimes produced strange experiences. I had read about it in psychology journals smuggled into the palace library. Ecstatic visions. Emotional overwhelm. The mind playing tricks under pressure. It meant nothing. I dismissed it entirely. But 2 days later, another woman approached me after ASR prayer. Then another. Within a week, I had heard from 5 women. Within 2 weeks, 12. By the end of the first month, the number had climbed to 37. They came to me after prayer sessions, pulling me aside in corridors, whispering hurriedly before their drivers arrived, sending me carefully worded messages through intermediaries. A teenage girl in Jeddah. An elderly Quran teacher in Medina. A young mother in Riyadh. A university student. A widow. A bride preparing for her wedding. Different ages. Different backgrounds. Different cities. But the same story. They were not describing dreams. They were adamant about that. These were not visions that came during sleep or moments of half-consciousness. These were encounters that happened during ASR prayer, while they were awake, alert, surrounded by other worshippers. The details they described were startlingly consistent. Some said the room became light, not bright like electric lamps, but luminous, as if the air itself had begun to glow. Some said time slowed, that the imam's voice stretched and deepened, that everything around them seemed to pause. Some said a man with calm eyes appeared between the prayer lines, standing where no physical person should be. Some heard words spoken directly into their hearts. "Follow me. I know your name. Come to me." And almost all of them described the same overwhelming response. Peace so profound it made them weep uncontrollably, even while trying to maintain composure in a room full of strangers. Within 3 months, I had quietly documented over 200 reports. And the pattern that emerged was terrifying in its precision. Almost every testimony happened during ASR. Not Fajr. Not Duhar. Not Maghrib or Isha. Specifically during the afternoon prayer, the one prayer most Muslims considered routine, unremarkable, the least spiritually significant of the 5 daily prayers. My outreach role quietly transformed into something else entirely. I stopped thinking about maintaining control and started asking questions. I began carrying a small journal, disguised as a planner, where I recorded details, dates, locations, descriptions, exact words the women claimed to have heard. I changed my schedule so I could attend ASR prayer in different mosques across the kingdom. Elite mosques in diplomatic quarters where ambassadors' wives prayed. Poor neighborhoods where working women gathered in cramped, undecorated halls. Women's universities where students rushed between classes and prayer. Rural towns outside Riyadh where older women still wore traditional dress and spoke in regional dialects. Everywhere, the same thing was happening. This was not isolated. This was not hysteria. This was not confined to one demographic or one location. This was universal. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in Riyadh, I met Hanan. She was a university student, probably 20 or 21, studying literature at Princess Noura University. I had been visiting the campus mosque as part of my rounds, sitting in the back row during ASR, observing more than participating. When the prayer ended, she moved through the crowd with purpose and grabbed my sleeve before I could stand. Princess Durai, she whispered urgently, her eyes wide and desperate. I need to tell you something. I steadied myself and nodded. During prayer just now, she continued, her voice shaking, the man appeared again. But this time he called me by my name. My skin went cold. He said, your prayers are searching, but your heart is hungry. The words hung in the air between us. She had never met me before this moment. She had no reason to know I had been collecting testimonies. Yet she spoke with the same precision, the same awe, the same trembling certainty I had heard in hundreds of other voices. Who do you think he is? I asked carefully, my throat tight. She looked around nervously, as if the walls themselves were listening. Then she leaned closer and whispered the word that Saudis are taught to fear, the name that carries danger in a kingdom built on religious uniformity. Isa. Jesus. My breath caught. In Islam, Isa is acknowledged as a prophet, a messenger, a man born of a virgin, a miracle worker, a figure of respect. But only that. Not a savior. Not the Son of God. Not someone who dies for sins or rises from the dead. And certainly not someone who appears in mosques, calling Muslims by name, speaking intimately into their hearts during prayer. Yet women across the kingdom, women who had never read the New Testament, who had never stepped inside a church, who had been raised to view Christianity as corrupted and false, were whispering the same name. Isa. Jesus. I thanked Hanan quietly and watched her disappear into the crowd of students flowing out of the mosque. Then I sat alone on the carpeted floor, my mind racing, my heart pounding. Something inside me cracked. Not violently, not loudly, but irreparably. The certainty I had built my entire life upon, the rituals, the doctrines, the carefully constructed walls of belief, had just developed a fracture. And I knew, somehow, that it would not hold much longer. The conflict inside me became unbearable. Everything I had been taught about Isa, Jesus, was clear and non-negotiable. He was a prophet, a respected messenger, a man blessed by Allah, born miraculously to the Virgin Maryam, granted the power to heal and speak truth. But that was where it ended. He was not divine, not the Son of God, not a savior who died for humanity's sins. Those beliefs, we were taught, were Christian corruptions, dangerous distortions that had led billions astray. And he was certainly not someone who appeared personally in mosques, walking between prayer lines, calling Muslims by name, speaking words of intimacy and invitation. Yet that was exactly what hundreds, and soon thousands, of people were reporting. By the end of the year, the reports exploded beyond anything I could have anticipated. What had started as a trickle became a flood. My carefully organized journal filled with testimony after testimony, city after city, demographic after demographic. I documented them in secret, hiding my notes in locked drawers, using coded language in case anyone discovered them. I could not let my family know. I could not let the religious authorities know. If they suspected I was investigating something this sensitive, this theologically dangerous, I would be removed from the program immediately. Or worse. The testimonies themselves were staggering in their diversity. A woman collapsed during prayer in the Grand Mosque in Mecca, later telling me that light had filled her vision so completely she thought she had died. A businessman in Jeddah left the mosque shaking, insisting that a man in white had stood between the rows of worshippers, visible only to him. A teenage boy in Taif, barely 15 years old, said his prayer froze when a voice spoke clearly into his heart. I carried your shame. None of these people owned Bibles. Saudi Arabia bans the importation, sale, and possession of Christian scriptures. Possessing one can lead to arrest, interrogation, deportation for foreigners, or imprisonment for citizens. None of them had Christian friends. In a kingdom where conversion from Islam is punishable by death and where churches do not exist, contact with Christians is virtually impossible for most Saudis. Yet the words they reported hearing were unmistakable. They did not sound like the Quran. They did not sound like Islamic teaching. They were gentle, personal, loving, invitations rather than commands, mercy rather than law. Late one night, after everyone in the palace had gone to sleep, desperation overcame caution. I sat in my bedroom with the door locked, curtains drawn, my laptop screen dimmed to almost nothing. I activated the hidden VPN I had installed months earlier, a dangerous tool that could bypass the kingdom's internet censorship but would result in severe punishment if discovered. My hands shook as I typed the phrases people had reported hearing. I am closer than your breath. I carried your shame. Follow me. Your prayers are searching, but your heart is hungry. The search results appeared slowly, filtered through encrypted servers halfway around the world. And what I found made my blood run cold. They were from the Injil, the New Testament. Verses from the Gospel of John, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Echoes from the prophet Isaiah, come to me, all who are weary. Paraphrases of Jesus' own words recorded in Matthew, Luke, and John, words about rest, redemption, relationship. Saudi Muslims were hearing Bible language inside Islamic prayer. People who had never read scripture were encountering scripture personified. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so loudly I feared someone might hear it through the walls. This was not coincidence. This was not mass hysteria. This was not explicable through psychology or sociology or religious fervor. This was something else entirely. Something supernatural. Something that defied every boundary the kingdom had constructed to keep its citizens sealed inside one unchanging narrative. I closed the laptop carefully and sat in darkness, my mind racing. For weeks afterward, I tried to continue my work as if nothing had changed. I attended prayers, collected testimonies, filed reports for my father that mentioned nothing about what I was really discovering. I smiled at family dinners, participated in royal functions, maintained the flawless exterior expected of me. But inside, I was unraveling. Every testimony I heard felt like another thread pulled loose. Every encounter described felt like another question I could not answer. Every time someone whispered the name, Isa, with tears in their eyes, I felt the walls around my own heart weakening. I had spent my entire life inside a system that demanded obedience without question, submission without doubt, conformity without exception. But someone, was breaking through. And then, on a quiet afternoon in the Palace Mosque, ASR reached me. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays were when the Palace household gathered for communal prayer in our private mosque, a small, elegant space with Persian carpets and carved wooden panels depicting geometric patterns. My mother was there. 2 of my cousins. Several household staff members. The palace imam led us through the familiar rhythms of ASR. At first, everything felt routine. We stood in lines, our bodies synchronized, our voices blending into the collective recitation we had performed thousands of times. My lips moved automatically. My mind wandered, as it usually did, to the testimonies I had collected that week, the patterns I was trying to understand, the questions I could not answer. And then, without warning, the air changed. Not loudly, not violently. It simply became different, thick, warm, alive. I felt it against my skin, in my lungs, like the atmosphere itself had shifted into something more substantial, more present. When I lifted my head from the prostration position, the room looked brighter, not with the glow of lamps or sunlight streaming through windows, but with something deeper, softer, impossible to explain. And in front of me, where no one should have been standing, was a man. He did not interrupt the prayer. He completed it with us, standing calmly while everyone else continued their recitations, oblivious to his presence. His clothes were white. Not the sterile white of hospital walls or the formal white of thobes worn by religious officials. This was living white, radiant, pure, like light woven into fabric. His eyes carried a calm that made fear disappear. Not by force, but by presence. Not by command, but by peace. And then he spoke. Not out loud, not audibly. But somehow I heard him clearly inside me, in a voice that bypassed my ears and went straight to my heart. Jeddah. My real name. Not princess. Not your highness. Not any of the titles that had been attached to me since birth. Just Jeddah. My heart pounded so violently I thought everyone would hear it. He continued, his voice gentle yet unmistakable. You pray with your body, but your soul has been waiting. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to collapse. Instead, tears began streaming down my face while everyone around me kept praying, unaware, unchanged, continuing the ritual as if nothing extraordinary was happening. I could not stop the tears. They came silently, relentlessly, soaking the carpet beneath my knees. He spoke again. ASR is when the sun turns. So do hearts. Then the prayer ended. The imam's voice concluded the final words. The other women began to rise, adjusting their veils, gathering their prayer beads, murmuring quiet greetings to one another. The room returned to normal. The air thinned. The light dimmed. The presence lifted. But I did not return to normal. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady, my vision blurred with tears. I excused myself quickly, mumbling something about not feeling well, and hurried through the corridors to my private chambers. Once inside, I locked the door and collapsed onto the floor, shaking uncontrollably. He had been real. Not imagination. Not stress. Not religious fervor or psychological projection. Real. That night, for the first time in my life, I did not open the Quran for my evening recitation. Instead, trembling, terrified, I opened the Bible. I had hidden it months earlier, a small English translation I had ordered online using a false name and a foreign shipping address, smuggled into the palace inside a box of French cosmetics. I had never dared to read it. Possessing it was dangerous enough. But now I was desperate. Hungry. I read for hours. Passages about Jesus healing the sick, forgiving sinners, calling people by name, Zacchaeus, Mary, Peter, offering rest to the weary, inviting the broken to come without fear. Everything contradicted what I had been taught. Islam presented Jesus as a prophet, distant and long dead. But the Bible presented him as alive, present, relational, someone who loved people individually, personally, intimately. And it explained everything Saudi Muslims were experiencing inside their prayers. For weeks, I read in secret. Late at night, when the palace was silent. Early in the morning, before servants arrived. Hidden behind locked doors, curtains drawn, heart racing every time I heard footsteps in the corridor. I read about grace, about forgiveness that was not earned but given, about a kingdom not built on obedience to law but on surrender to love. And slowly, something inside me shifted. This was not rebellion. This was invitation. But even as the truth settled into my heart, the reality of my situation became crushingly clear. Following Jesus in Saudi Arabia is not inspiration, it's execution. If my family discovered what I was reading, what I was believing, I would not simply be reprimanded or restricted. I would disappear. The stakes could not have been clearer. In Saudi Arabia, apostasy, leaving Islam, is punishable by death. The law is explicit. The enforcement is real. People do not simply disappear metaphorically. They disappear literally. Arrested quietly. Detained indefinitely. Sometimes their families are told they died in accidents. Sometimes families are told nothing at all. If my father discovered what I was reading, what I was beginning to believe, I would not be given a chance to explain or recant. I would simply cease to exist. Yet every day, the pull grew stronger. Each time ASR approached, I felt him nearer. Not as a theological concept or a historical figure, but as a presence, close, patient, waiting. I continued performing my royal duties flawlessly. I attended charity events, sat through tedious meetings with religious educators, smiled at family dinners, participated in palace prayers. On the surface, nothing had changed. I was still Princess Zahra, obedient daughter, faithful Muslim, dutiful member of the royal household. But inside, everything was different. One evening, alone in my room with the door locked and the lights dimmed, I could no longer bear the weight of uncertainty. I knelt on the floor, my hands trembling, and whispered the most dangerous prayer I had ever prayed. Isa, if this is truly you, I need to know. The room became silent. Not the ordinary silence of an empty space, but the kind of silence that feels intentional, expectant. Then peace settled over me like a blanket, gentle, unhurried, complete. And inside my heart, I heard words that would change me forever. I did not come to take your kingdom. I came to give you one. In that moment, something inside me surrendered. Not politically. I was not renouncing my citizenship or planning some public declaration. Not publicly. I could not tell anyone what had happened. Not my family. Not my friends. Not even the women whose testimonies I had been collecting. But eternally. Whatever this meant, wherever it led, I was no longer holding back. From that night forward, I lived a double life. Publicly, I remained Princess Zahra, performing my duties, maintaining appearances, attending the 5 daily prayers, reciting the Quran at family gatherings, nodding along during sermons about Islamic purity and the dangers of Western corruption. Privately, I read the Bible every chance I could. I prayed to Jesus in whispered words, feeling awkward and uncertain but compelled by something stronger than fear. I began to understand grace, not as a concept to be studied, but as a reality to be experienced. Forgiveness that did not need to be earned. Love that did not need to be deserved. Acceptance that was not conditional on performance. It was everything Islam had never offered me. And slowly, I began to notice others. Subtle signs. A woman at a prayer session whose lips moved differently during the recitation, as if she were speaking to someone rather than reciting memorized text. A university student who lingered after ASR with tears in her eyes, looking around as if searching for someone invisible. A teacher who asked me, very carefully, if I had ever felt that prayer was answered by presence instead of silence. They were everywhere. Secret believers. People who had encountered Jesus during ASR and did not know what to do with the experience. People who were terrified, isolated, pretending to be faithful Muslims while their hearts were being transformed by something they could not explain and dared not speak about. The burden of this knowledge became almost unbearable. I knew, through the testimonies I had collected, through the patterns I had documented, that millions of Saudis were encountering Jesus during prayer. But most of them were alone, afraid, confused. They had no one to talk to, no guidance, no community, no safe space to ask questions or process what was happening to them. They were encountering the living God in the most controlled nation on earth, and they had nowhere to turn. I could not lead them openly. I could not organize them. I could not create networks or distribute resources without risking exposure. But I could continue documenting. Not just as an investigator now, but as a witness. Not to control the narrative, as my father had intended, but to preserve it. Because I understood something with absolute clarity: what was happening in Saudi Arabia was too significant to remain hidden forever. One day, somehow, the world would need to know that Jesus had walked into the most closed kingdom on earth, not through missionaries or political movements or military conquest, but through prayer itself. And when that day came, there would need to be a record. So I kept writing, kept listening, kept collecting testimonies from women and men, young and old, rich and poor, who were experiencing the impossible. I no longer saw myself as simply a princess with an assignment. I was a secret believer with a mission, and I would carry it, no matter the cost. By the second year, the numbers had become staggering. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. Through my network of contacts, women I had met through the outreach program, educators, students, relatives of people who had experienced encounters, I began to understand the true scope of what was happening. This was not isolated to Riyadh or Jeddah. This was spreading across the entire kingdom, from the northern regions near Jordan to the southern provinces bordering Yemen, from the all-rich eastern province to the ancient cities of the Hejaz, urban centers and rural villages, coastal towns and desert communities. Everywhere, the same phenomenon. And it was not limited to one demographic. Young university students encountered him during campus prayers. Elderly men who had performed Hajj multiple times described seeing him in mosques they had prayed in for decades. Wealthy businessmen, poor laborers, educated professionals, illiterate Bedouins, women in royal households, girls in government schools. The movement cut across every social boundary, every economic class, every regional distinction. But the common thread remained constant: ASR prayer. The afternoon prayer continued to be the primary moment of encounter. Not exclusively, some reported experiences during other prayers, or even outside formal prayer times, but overwhelmingly, the testimonies centered on ASR. And the characteristics of these encounters were remarkably consistent. People described a presence that did not accuse, did not threaten, did not control or condemn. Instead, it invited. It welcomed. It called people by name and spoke words of love, mercy, and acceptance. This was personal, not institutional. Peaceful, not fearful. It was everything Islam's legalistic structure was not. The government noticed. Of course they did. By the end of that year, I began hearing reports of officials trying to silence the testimonies. Imams received instructions from the Ministry of Religious Affairs to dismiss any claims of supernatural encounters as delusion or satanic deception. Monitoring of mosques increased, security cameras installed in prayer halls, informants planted among congregations, sudden inspections of religious programs. Some of the more vocal witnesses disappeared. A young man in Dammam who had shared his testimony openly with friends vanished one night. A woman in Mecca who tried to organize a prayer group for others who had experienced encounters was arrested and never seen again. A teacher in Tabuk who mentioned the phenomenon during a lecture was removed from his position and reportedly sent to a rehabilitation center for religious correction. The message was clear: speak publicly about these encounters, and you will be silenced. But silence could not stop what was happening in hearts. An underground network began to form, quietly and carefully. Secret believers started finding each other through subtle signals: a phrase mentioned after prayer, a question asked carefully, a look of recognition when certain names were spoken. They met in private homes, in small groups of 2 or 3, whispering testimonies to one another and weeping with relief that they were not alone. They shared smuggled Bible passages, typed on phones and quickly deleted. They prayed together in hiding, asking Jesus to reveal himself more clearly, to protect them, to help them understand what was happening. My role evolved. I was no longer simply documenting testimonies. I was protecting people. Using my royal position as cover, I began helping new believers stay safe. I warned them about surveillance. I taught them how to communicate carefully. I connected people in different cities who could support each other discreetly. I smuggled resources, translated Bible portions, basic explanations of Christian faith, contact information for underground networks, hidden inside charity donations and educational materials. It was dangerous. Every connection I made increased the risk of exposure. Every resource I provided could be traced back to me if discovered. But I could not stop. Because what was happening in Saudi Arabia was impossible by every human measure. Jesus was walking into ASR prayer, not through churches, because there were no churches. Not through missionaries, because missionaries were banned and expelled. Not through political campaigns or military conquest or cultural exchange. Through prayer itself. The very ritual that was supposed to keep Saudis bound to Islamic orthodoxy had become the doorway through which Jesus was entering the kingdom. The government could install cameras. The religious police could monitor conversations. The imams could preach against deception. Families could enforce conformity. But they could not stop what happened when people bowed in prayer and encountered the living God. In mosques across Saudi Arabia, from gleaming new structures in Riyadh to ancient prayer halls in Medina, from university campuses to rural villages, something unstoppable was unfolding. In prayer lines, hearts were waking up. The danger escalated faster than I anticipated. Within months, the religious police, the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, began intensifying their scrutiny of mosques. They stationed observers at prayer sessions, watching for unusual behavior, monitoring who lingered too long after prayers, noting who wept during ASR. Families were encouraged to report suspicious changes in relatives, questions about Christianity, unusual emotional responses during worship, decreased enthusiasm for Islamic teaching. The kingdom was responding to something it could not name but clearly sensed, a disturbance in the spiritual atmosphere, a movement it could not control. Technology became a weapon. Phone records were monitored for searches containing Christian terminology. Internet history was tracked for access to biblical websites. Social media accounts were scanned for coded language that might indicate conversion. The testimonies I collected became darker. A woman in Riyadh was disowned by her entire family after she confessed to her sister that she believed Isa was more than a prophet. Her father held a funeral for her while she was still alive, declaring her dead to the family. She lost her home, her inheritance, her name. A businessman in Jeddah was imprisoned after customs officials discovered a Bible hidden in his luggage returning from a business trip to Dubai. He was detained for 8 months without trial, interrogated repeatedly, pressured to renounce what he had read. A university student who spoke too openly about her encounter during ASR simply disappeared. 1 week she was attending classes. The next week, her seat was empty. Her roommate told me quietly that religious authorities had taken her in the night. No one knew where she was. The cost was becoming undeniable. And I was not immune. My family began noticing changes in me. My mother commented that I seemed distracted during family prayers. My brother Khalid asked why I was spending so much time alone. My father questioned whether the outreach program was affecting my spiritual stability. "You seem troubled, Jahra," he said one evening after dinner. "Perhaps this work is too heavy for you. Perhaps it is time to consider marriage. A husband would provide structure. Children would give you purpose." The pressure to marry intensified. Suitors were mentioned. Families were considered. My father spoke of alliances that would benefit our position. Marriage, I understood, was not about my happiness. It was about control. A way to stabilize me, redirect me, tie me to obligations that would eliminate the freedom I had been using to investigate testimonies. There were moments when I was tempted to stop. Safety beckoned. Silence promised survival. Conformity offered comfort. I could preserve my position, protect my family name, maintain the luxurious life I had always known. All I had to do was stop asking questions. Stop collecting testimonies. Stop reading the Bible in secret. Stop believing that Jesus was more than Islam allowed him to be. But every time the temptation grew strong, I remembered. I remembered the palace mosque, the living white, the voice that called me, Jarrah. The words that pierced through 24 years of religious performance. You pray with your body, but your soul has been waiting. I remembered the hundreds, now thousands, of transformed lives. Women who had been empty now radiant. Men who had been bound by guilt now free. Young people who had been lost now found. I remember the eternal significance of what was happening. This was bigger than Saudi Arabia. This was God moving in the most closed kingdom on earth. This was prophecy being fulfilled in real time. The promise that every nation would hear, that no people would be unreached, that even the most hostile ground would become fertile soil. This was preparation for something larger than I could yet see. So I made a strategic choice. I would continue documenting testimonies, not for immediate publication but for future revelation. I would build safe networks, connecting secret believers carefully, discreetly, giving them resources and encouragement without exposing them. I would prepare for the day when this story could be told, when the testimonies I had hidden could become public witness. I became more careful, more strategic, more prayerful. I learned to speak in coded language, to meet people in ways that would not attract attention, to provide digital Bibles through encrypted channels, to pray for protection over those who were taking the greatest risks. I was no longer the fearful princess who had dismissed the first testimony as imagination. I was becoming something else. A witness, a documentarian, a secret keeper for a movement that would one day shake the foundation of the kingdom. And I understood, with sobering clarity, that my identity had fundamentally changed. I am no longer just a princess of Saudi Arabia. The movement has not stopped. If anything, it has accelerated. Every week, new testimonies reach me. Every month, the reports multiply. ASR remains the moment when heaven breaks through. The afternoon prayer that was once routine has become the doorway to divine encounter. Across Saudi Arabia, in mosques from Riyadh to Jeddah, from Mecca to Medina, from wealthy compounds to rural villages, Muslims are meeting Jesus during prayer. Not in dreams, not in visions during sleep, but in the middle of Islamic worship, while they are awake, alert, surrounded by other believers who see nothing unusual. And I am a witness to what God is secretly doing inside the most closed kingdom on earth. My identity has shifted so completely that I barely recognize the woman I was 3 years ago. I was a princess who thought royalty meant palaces and titles and bloodlines. Now I understand that true royalty comes from belonging to the kingdom of God, a kingdom not built on wealth or power or control, but on grace, truth, and love. I thought freedom meant choosing my own clothes or traveling without permission or making decisions about my own life. Now I know that real freedom came when I surrendered to Jesus, when I stopped performing and started trusting, when I exchanged the weight of religious obligation for the rest of relationship. What is happening in Saudi Arabia carries significance far beyond our borders. It is proof that no place is too closed for God, no government too powerful, no religious system too entrenched, no nation too hostile. It is a demonstration of Jesus' personal love for Muslims, not a distant, theological love, but an intimate, name-calling, presence-manifesting love that meets people exactly where they are. It is hope for religious transformation across the entire Middle East and beyond. If God can move in Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, the guardian of Mecca and Medina, the nation most committed to preserving Islamic purity, then He can move anywhere. So let me speak directly to you, whoever you are, wherever you are reading this. God is moving in impossible places. Right now. While governments sleep and religious authorities pretend nothing is happening, Jesus is walking into prayer halls, calling people by name, offering them life. He meets people where they are, not where religious leaders say they should be, not where tradition demands, but where they are, broken, searching, hungry, waiting. Prayer can become encounter. It does not have to be empty ritual or mechanical recitation. It can be the moment when heaven touches earth, when the divine breaks through, when everything changes. And truth cannot be permanently suppressed. You can ban Bibles. You can criminalize conversion. You can monitor internet searches and imprison questioners and threaten families. But you cannot stop God from revealing Himself to people who are desperate for Him. I am asking you to do something. Pray for Saudi believers. Pray for the millions who have encountered Jesus but are navigating this journey alone, afraid, and isolated. Pray for their protection, their growth, their courage. Share this testimony. Let people know what God is doing. The world needs to hear that the impossible is happening. Trust God's sovereignty in closed nations. He is not limited by political systems or religious restrictions. He is not waiting for permission from governments or approval from religious councils. And believe for similar movements worldwide. If it is happening in Saudi Arabia, it can happen in Iran, in North Korea, in any place that seems impenetrable to the gospel. Because the story is not finished. It is still unfolding. More testimonies arrive daily. The movement remains underground, but it is unstoppable. Jesus continues to appear in ASR prayers, calling Muslims out of performance and into relationship, out of fear and into freedom. I dream of a day when Saudi believers can worship openly. When testimonies that now hide in whispers fill stadiums. When the underground church becomes visible, celebrated, undeniable. When the world sees what God has done in secret and marvels at His faithfulness. I dream of a Saudi Arabia transformed, not through political revolution or military intervention, but through millions of individual encounters with the living Christ. That day has not yet come, but it is coming. I stand at my palace window now, the same window where this story began, watching the call to ASR echo across Riyadh. The muezzin's voice carries over marble buildings and luxury compounds, over poor neighborhoods and royal estates, summoning the faithful to prayer. But I no longer hear it the same way. I hear it as an invitation to divine encounter, as the moment when heaven touches earth, as the beginning of Saudi Arabia's greatest awakening. Somewhere in this city, right now, someone is kneeling for ASR prayer. The room around them is about to become light. Time is about to slow. A presence they cannot explain is about to fill the space. And they are about to hear their name, spoken by the one who gave his life so they could find theirs. The government does not know what is happening. The religious establishment pretends nothing has changed. But in prayer lines across the kingdom, hearts are waking up. Jesus is walking into ASR. And I am no longer just a princess of Saudi Arabia. I am a witness to the greatest secret in the Muslim world. And this is only the beginning.